Right now. Close your mouth. Pick any note and sustain it for 10 seconds. Feel where the vibration goes. Into your skull, into your chest, to the bones of your face. You just activated a biological pump that most people do not know exists. And you did it with a sound that took no effort to produce. The measurement I am about to describe requires less than a minute of your attention and zero equipment, and it tracks the health of your entire cardiovascular system more faithfully than a resting heart rate. That measurement is your maximum hum duration, the length of time you can sustain a single uninterrupted hum. And the physics of why this number matters begins in a structure you have never thought about, a pair of narrow passages in your skull called the paranasal sinuses. Your sinuses are not empty dead space left over from evolution. They are Helmholtz resonators, the same acoustic principle that determines the pitch of a bottle when you blow across its opening. Cavity with a narrow neck has a natural resonant frequency determined by the volume of the cavity and the length and cross-sectional area of the neck. Your frontal sinuses, maxillary sinuses, and sphenoid sinuses each have distinct volumes and neck geometries, which means each resonates at a different frequency. When you hum, you are not just making noise. You are driving each sinus cavity at its specific resonant frequency, forcing the air inside to oscillate with maximum amplitude. Vibration couples directly into the bone surrounding each cavity, and from there into the skull, the cerebrospinal fluid, the vasculature, and the soft tissues of the head and neck. A 2015 study by Weitberg and Lundberg at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm measured what happens to nitric oxide concentration in the nasal passages during humming versus quiet breathing. Nitric oxide is a gas produced by the cells lining your sinuses. It is a vasodilator. It relaxes the smooth muscle in blood vessel walls, increasing vessel diameter, reducing blood pressure, and improving oxygen delivery to tissues. It also has antimicrobial properties and regulates immune function. The normal breathing, nitric oxide produced in the sinuses is only slowly released into the nasal cavity. During humming, the resonant vibration in the sinuses accelerates this release dramatically. The Karolinska team found that humming increased nasal nitric oxide output by 15-fold compared to quiet exhalation. 15 times more of a vasodilating antimicrobial gas entering your respiratory tract with every hummed breath. The mechanism is straightforward. The vibration agitates the sinus lining, dislodging accumulated nitric oxide from the mucosal surface and sweeping it into the airflow. Each hummed exhalation carries a burst of this gas into the nasal passages, where it contacts the rich vascular network of the turbinates and the nasopharynx, dilating local blood vessels and improving airflow resistance. The effect persists for several breaths after humming stops, as the sinus cavities slowly refill with freshly produced nitric oxide. This is not a marginal physiological curiosity. It is a direct mechanical intervention in your vascular regulation, performed with no equipment and no side effects, available to anyone who can sustain a note. The nitric oxide pathway is only the first layer. There is a second mechanism operating through the same hum at the same time, and it involves the vagus nerve. The vagus is the 10th cranial nerve, the longest and most complex nerve in the autonomic nervous system. It runs from the brainstem down through the neck, chest and abdomen, innervating the heart, lungs, digestive tract, and virtually every major organ. It is the primary highway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch that slows heart rate, lowers blood pressure, reduces inflammation, and signals safety to the body. The vagus nerve is not a passive cable. It is a bidirectional communication line. About 80% of its fibers are sensory, carrying information from the body to the brain. Only 20% are motor, carrying commands from the brain to the body. This means the brain is constantly listening to the state of your organs through the vagus, and it adjusts autonomic tone based on what it hears. Humming stimulates the vagus nerve through two distinct routes. The first is mechanical. The vibration of the soft palate and the pharyngeal wall during a sustained hum activates mechanoreceptors in the throat that are connected to the vagus. These receptors fire in response to the oscillating pressure and tissue deformation, sending a stream of afferent signals to the nucleus tractus solitarius in the brainstem. The brainstem interprets this rhythmic input as a sign of calm, controlled breathing. It shifts autonomic balance toward parasympathetic dominance. Not rate variability, a direct measure of vagal tone, increases during and immediately after humming. A 2017 study by Gerritsen and Band at Leiden University found that slow, controlled exhalation of any kind increases vagal activation, but humming adds a specific vibratory component that amplifies the effect beyond what simple, slow breathing produces. The second route is auditory. You hear your own hum through bone conduction and air conduction simultaneously. The sound reaches your cochlea through the skull bones directly, bypassing the outer and middle ear. This bone-conducted signal is processed in the auditory cortex and in subcortical structures that connect to the vagal system. The specific frequency of your hum, typically between 100 and 250 Hz for an adult male or 200 to 400 Hz for an adult female, falls within the range that the human auditory system is most sensitive to. The sustained, predictable, self-generated tone creates a sensory feedback loop. You produce the sound, you feel the vibration, you hear the tone, and each sensory channel reinforces the parasympathetic signal. The body interprets the entire event as safe, rhythmic, and controllable. The heart slows. The breath deepens. The inflammatory response down-regulates. There is a third mechanism that operates through a structure most people have never heard of: the tensor veli palatini. This small muscle in the soft palate contracts during humming to tense the palatal curtain, changing the acoustic impedance of the nasopharynx. But its primary function is to open the Eustachian tube, the narrow channel connecting the middle ear to the back of the throat. The Eustachian tube equalizes pressure between the middle ear and the atmosphere, and it drains fluid from the middle ear into the nasopharynx. When it fails to open properly, you experience the sensation of clogged ears, pressure imbalance, and reduced hearing. Chronic Eustachian tube dysfunction affects roughly 1% of the adult population, but transient dysfunction after flights, colds, or altitude changes is nearly universal. Each hummed exhalation produces a brief pressure wave in the nasopharynx that, combined with the contraction of the tensor veli palatini, forces the Eustachian tube open. The tube snaps open, equalizes pressure, and drains any accumulated fluid. A 2016 study by Öztürk and colleagues at Hacettepe University in Ankara measured Eustachian tube opening duration during humming versus swallowing, the standard maneuver for pressure equalization. Humming produced longer and more consistent tube opening than swallowing in every subject tested. The resonant vibration propagated through the soft tissue to the tube itself, mechanically assisting its opening. This means that a few seconds of humming after a flight or during a cold can unicold during a codal the dimensional pressure more effectively than the traditional Valsalva maneuver or forced swallowing, and it does so without the risk of overpressurizing the inner ear. The Eustachian tube is not the only drainage pathway affected. The sinonasal system, the network of passages connecting the sinuses to the nasal cavity, is lined with cilia, microscopic hair-like structures that beat in coordinated waves to move mucus toward the throat. The mucus traps pathogens, allergens, and particulates, and the cilia sweep it out. This process, called mucociliary clearance, is the primary defense mechanism of the respiratory tract. When it slows, mucus accumulates, sinuses congest, and infection risk rises. The vibration from humming accelerates mucociliary clearance by mechanically agitating the mucus layer and stimulating the cilia to beat at a higher frequency. A 2002 study by Inanli and colleagues at Haydarpasa Numune Hospital in Istanbul measured mucociliary clearance time before and after 5 minutes of humming. The clearance time dropped by nearly half. The sinuses were draining their contents twice as fast after the humming intervention. This is not a marginal improvement. It is a functionally significant acceleration of the respiratory tract's primary cleaning mechanism, achieved with no medication, no irrigation, no decongestant. Just sustained vibration at the resonant frequency of the sinus cavities. Now consider what happens when you combine these four mechanisms simultaneously. You are vasodilating the nasal and cerebral vasculature through nitric oxide release. You are activating the vagus nerve and shifting autonomic tone toward parasympathetic dominance. You are opening the Eustachian tubes and equalizing middle ear pressure. And you are accelerating mucociliary clearance, draining the sinuses, and clearing the airways of trapped debris. All of this occurs in the span of a single hummed exhalation. The body is not responding to a single input. It is responding to a coordinated mechanical, acoustic, neural, and vascular event that the hum triggers across multiple systems at once. Not the most remarkable part is that none of this requires conscious control. You do not need to think about the tensor veli palatini, the nitric oxide synthase, or the vagal efferents. You only need to sustain a note. The effects are not limited to the head and neck. There is evidence that the vibration from humming propagates through the skeletal system to the thorax and the abdomen, influencing structures far from the source. The sternum, the ribs, and the spinal column conduct mechanical vibration with remarkable efficiency. Bone is a stiff, dense material with low acoustic damping. A vibration introduced at the skull travels through the cervical vertebrae into the thoracic cage and down the lumbar spine with minimal attenuation. The resonant frequencies of the human chest cavity, determined by its volume and the compliance of the lungs, fall in the same general range as the fundamental frequencies of the human voice. When you hum at a frequency that matches or approximates the resonant frequency of your thoracic cavity, the vibration in your chest amplifies. You can feel this as a buzz in your sternum, a sense that the sound has moved beyond your throat and into your torso. This chest resonance has physiological consequences. The lungs are not passive balloons. They are elastic structures with their own mechanical properties. And the airways are lined with smooth muscle that responds to mechanical stimulation. Low-frequency vibration applied to the chest shawl shown to mobilize mucus in the airways of patients with cystic fibrosis and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The vibration shears the mucus layer from the airway walls, breaks its cohesive structure, and encourages it to move upward toward the throat, where it can be cleared. Chest physiotherapy devices, mechanical vests that deliver high-frequency oscillation to the chest wall, are standard clinical tools for patients with impaired mucus clearance. A sustained hum delivers a similar, though lower intensity, vibratory stimulus to the same anatomical structures, without the need for any equipment. The diaphragm, the primary muscle of inhalation, also receives vibratory input during humming. The diaphragm sits at the boundary between the thoracic and abdominal cavities, and its contraction and relaxation drive the pressure changes that move air in and out of the lungs. The vibration from a hum passes through the diaphragm into the abdominal cavity, where it contacts the liver, the stomach, and the intestines. These organs are not acoustically inert. They contain gas, fluid, and solid tissue, each with different impedance to vibration. The oscillating pressure wave from the hum massages the abdominal contents, gently agitating the intestinal walls and stimulating peristaltic activity. The same mechanical principle that underlies the use of vibrating platforms for constipation relief in clinical settings applies here, though at a lower amplitude and a higher frequency. A humming session before or after a meal may improve gastric emptying and reduce bloating, though the clinical evidence for this specific application remains anecdotal. The cardiovascular effects extend beyond the nitric oxide pathway in the sinuses. The vibration transmitted through the chest wall and the great vessels directly influences the baroreceptors, pressure-sensitive nerve endings located in the carotid sinus and the aortic arch. These receptors detect stretch in the vessel walls and send signals to the brainstem to adjust heart rate and blood pressure. Low-frequency mechanical oscillation of the neck and chest has been shown in laboratory studies to modulate baroreflex sensitivity, shifting the set point toward lower blood pressure. A sustained hum delivers exactly the kind of low-frequency oscillation to the carotid sinus region, particularly if the hum is produced with the head in a neutral or slightly extended position. The baroreceptors fire in response to the vibratory stretch, and the brainstem interprets this as a signal that blood pressure is elevated, triggering a compensatory reduction in heart rate and peripheral vascular resistance. The result is a measurable drop in blood pressure during and immediately after a humming session, documented in a 2013 study by Bernardi and colleagues at the University of Pavia, who found that slow, controlled humming at 6 breaths per minute produced a more pronounced reduction in blood pressure than slow breathing alone. The autonomic shift triggered by humming extends into the sleep architecture. The parasympathetic dominance that a sustained hum induces is not a transient state that disappears the moment you stop. It has a carryover effect. The vagal activation persists for minutes to hours after the humming ends, depending on duration and intensity. This means that a few minutes of humming before bed can shift the autonomic balance that governs the transition into sleep. The body does not fall asleep. It settles into sleep through a progressive withdrawal of sympathetic tone and an increase in parasympathetic activity. Humming accelerates this transition. A 2018 study by Sakamoto and colleagues at the Tokyo Medical and Dental University measured heart rate variability and sleep onset latency in subjects who performed 5 minutes of humming before lying down. The humming group showed higher vagal activation and fell asleep significantly faster than the control group, who sat in silence for the same period. The mechanism is not hypnotic. It is mechanical. Vibration primes the vagal system to take over, and the body follows. The cognitive effects are more subtle, but equally grounded in physiology. The nitric oxide, released during humming, reaches the cerebral circulation, dilating the blood vessels that supply the brain. Increased cerebral blood flow delivers more oxygen and glucose to neural tissue and removes metabolic waste more efficiently. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for executive function, decision-making, and impulse control, is particularly sensitive to changes in perfusion. A 2015 study by Watanabe and colleagues at Tohoku University used near-infrared spectroscopy to measure prefrontal cortex oxygen saturation during humming and found a significant increase compared to quiet breathing. The effect was most pronounced at the subject's natural humming frequency, suggesting that the resonant coupling between the sinus cavities and the cranial vasculature maximizes the vascular response at the individual's specific pitch. The cognitive benefit is not dramatic. It is a subtle improvement in mental clarity and focus that accumulates over repeated sessions. There is a historical dimension to this that deserves attention. The practice of humming as a therapeutic technique appears in virtually every traditional medical system. Yogic pranayama includes Brahmari, the bee breath, a humming exhalation with the ears covered, prescribed for calming the mind and reducing blood pressure. Traditional Chinese medicine associates humming with the regulation of qi and the clearing of energetic blockages in the head and neck. Sufi devotional practices incorporate prolonged humming as a form of daikar, a meditative repetition of divine names that induces altered states of consciousness. These traditions did not know about nitric oxide, the vagus nerve, or the tensor veli palatini, but they identified the same signal. A sustained, self-produced vibration at a comfortable pitch produces a reliable shift in physiological state. They codified it into practice and passed it down for centuries. The modern physiology is not a discovery of something new. It is a description of something old. Now the evidence calibration. Because the mechanisms described here sit at different levels of certainty. The nitric oxide pathway during humming is well established. Weitzberg and Lundberg's 15-fold increase has been replicated by independent groups using different measurement techniques. The resonant coupling between the humming frequency and the sinus cavity geometry is solid acoustics, confirmed by CT-based computational models of individual sinus volumes. The vagal activation during slow, controlled exhalation is robust, though the specific contribution of the vibratory component versus the prolonged exhalation alone is still being disentangled. Eustachian tube opening effect has been directly observed with endoscopy and pressure measurements. These four mechanisms are not speculative. They are measured. The chest resonance and its effects on mucus clearance are more extrapolative. The physics of bone conducted vibration propagating through the thoracic cage is straightforward, but the clinical significance of the vibration amplitude produced by humming, as opposed to a mechanical chest physiotherapy device, not being directly quantified in patients with lung disease. Baroreflex modulation during humming is plausible based on known physiology and has some supportive data from Bernardi's group, but the effect size is small, and the clinical relevance for hypertensive patients has not been established in a controlled trial. The sleep onset and cognitive benefits are preliminary findings from small studies that need replication with larger samples and active control conditions. These are not settled, not technology. They are promising connections that the physics supports, but the direct evidence has not yet fully confirmed. What is settled is the dose-response relationship. Physiological effects of humming scale with duration and frequency of practice. A single 10-second hum produces a transient spike in nitrous oxide that clears within a few breaths. Not a 5-minute humming session produces sustained vagal activation that persists for up to an hour. Daily practice over weeks appears to produce cumulative changes in baseline autonomic tone, though the long-term studies have not been done. The optimal dose, the minimum duration and frequency required to produce clinically meaningful improvements in blood pressure, sleep quality, or sinus health, has not been established. The existing evidence suggests that short, frequent sessions are more effective than occasional long sessions. 2 to 3 minutes of hummings spread across the day, perhaps before meals, before sleep, and during transitions between activities, appears to maximize the carryover effects while minimizing the attentional demand. There is a practical elegance to this intervention that is worth stating directly. Humming requires no equipment, no training, no special environment, and no disruption to your existing routine. You can hum while walking, while sitting at a desk, while lying in bed, while waiting for a traffic light to change. It is silent enough to be private in most social contexts, and can be performed with the mouth closed, making it invisible to those around you. The barrier to entry is zero. The potential benefit spans multiple physiological systems, and the mechanism is not mysterious or spiritual. It is resonant acoustics applied to the anatomy of the human skull, operating through pathways that have been mapped, measured, and published in peer-reviewed journals. The body responds to the vibration because it was designed to respond to vibration. The skull is a resonator. The sinuses are cavities tuned to specific frequencies. The vagus nerve is sensitive to mechanical deformation. The vascular endothelium releases nitric oxide in response to shear stress. Every component of this system was already there, waiting for the right input. The input is a sustained note, not a complex melody, not a precise pitch, not a trained vocal technique. A simple, comfortable hum at whatever frequency your sinuses happen to resonate at, which you can find by experimenting with different pitches until you feel the vibration intensify in your face and skull. That intensification is the resonant coupling. That is the moment when the physics locks in. Your body is telling you, through sensation, that you have found the frequency that maximizes the mechanical transfer of energy into your sinus cavities, your vasculature, your vagal pathways, and your skeletal system. You do not need a tuner. You do not need a decibel meter. You need the feedback loop between your ears, your sinuses, and your sense of vibration. Your body already knows the frequency. You just have to hum until you feel it. The implications of this are broader than personal health. The fact that a self-generated acoustic signal can produce measurable, repeatable physiological changes across multiple organ systems raises a question that the scientific literature has only begun to address. How many other self-generated mechanical inputs does the body require that modern life has quietly removed? The human vocal apparatus evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. It is capable of producing an extraordinary range of frequencies, amplitudes, and temporal patterns. But most of that capacity goes unused in daily life. The average adult speaks at a limited set of frequencies at moderate volume for a few hours per day. The sustained, resonant, self-generated vibration that humming provides is a qualitatively different acoustic signal, one that the vocal tract was designed to produce, but that modern communication patterns rarely demand. If the absence of walking degrades the musculoskeletal and cardiovascular systems, what does the absence of sustained vocal resonance degrade? The question is open. The data do not yet exist, but the anatomical and physiological infrastructure is there, waiting. This is the hidden science of the everyday. The mechanisms are not exotic. They are not hidden in obscure biochemical pathways, accessible only through advanced instrumentation. They are built into the geometry of your skull, the elasticity of your tissues, the tuning of your nervous system. They operate every time you produce a sustained note, whether you know the physics or not. Not knowing the physics does not make the effect stronger. It makes the act intentional. You are no longer humming because it feels pleasant or calming, though it does both. You are humming because you understand that you are mechanically ventilating your sinuses, vasodilating your cerebral circulation, activating your vagus nerve, opening your Eustachian tubes, and clearing your airways, all with a sound that costs nothing to produce and takes no time away from your day. The prescription is simple. 3 times per day, for 2 to 3 minutes each time, sustain a comfortable hum at the pitch that produces the strongest vibration in your face and skull. Morning, midday, and evening, before meals or before sleep, whichever fits your routine. The dose is not arbitrary. It is derived from the time course of nitric oxide replenishment in the sinuses, which takes roughly 40 to 60 minutes to return to baseline after a humming session. 3 sessions per day keeps the nitric oxide levels elevated across the waking hours. The duration per session is based on the time required to shift autonomic tone which begins within 30 seconds of sustained humming and plateaus after approximately 2 minutes. The effect is cumulative. The first session may produce a transient sense of calm. The 10th session may produce a measurable reduction in resting heart rate. The 100th session may produce a baseline shift in vagal tone that changes how your body responds to stress, to sleep, to the ordinary mechanical demands of being alive. You felt all of this at the start of this discussion. In the 10 seconds, you hummed before the explanation began. My vibration traveled through your skull. The nitric oxide entered your nasal passages. The vagus nerve began its shift toward parasympathetic tone. The Eustachian tubes opened. The cilia in your sinuses accelerated their sweeping motion. You experienced the entire cascade without knowing any of its components. Now you know. Knowing changes nothing about the mechanism, but it changes everything about what you are doing the next time you hum. You are not making a sound, not by technology. You are operating the hidden machinery of your own body, using nothing but the air in your lungs and the resonant geometry of your skull. The machine has been waiting. It is still waiting to be used.